very quickly. I'm Rwitwika Bhattacharya. I'm the CEO for Swaniti initiative, which is a social enterprise that works with members of parliaments and state governments on providing technical assistance. One of the things that we were hoping to bring to CyFy was to talk about the perspective of elected officials and representatives. I know we have Rajya Sabha members and Lok Sabha member today about technology, and specifically about both the ground level insight as well as the policy insight. And we know we've all been talking about policy regulations for the last day, so what does that mean practically and what does it mean from their perspective? With that, we have a very esteemed panel, and I'll briefly introduce them, and then we'll jump right into discussion this morning. We have Dr. Sasmit Patra, who represents Odisha from BJD, incredibly smart man. We have Dr. Fauzia Khan, who has been ex-minister in the Maharashtra state government and currently in the Rajya Sabha. Feel free to clap louder. I will pause if you would like to clap. We have Dr. Mahua Maji, who is from Rajya Sabha from Jharkhand. And we have Mr. Midhun Reddy from YSRCP from Lok Sabha, Andhra. He's our only Lok Sabha MP on the panel, so we have to promise to be nice to him. So with that being said, we'll jump right into discussion. There's a lot of discussion going on, whether it's data privacy, whether it is data localization, whether it is online protection, gendered perspective. Dr. Patra, let me start off with you this morning. When it comes to priorities, policy priorities, if you were to list out what you see as the most pressing issues right now, both from a constituent's perspective as well as what lawmakers need to predict on how technology will affect constituents, and ready ourselves for that, what are some of the policy pieces that you think we should prioritize?
Thank you, and a warm good morning to all of you. It's such a pleasure being here this morning. There are 2 or 3 key areas I'd like to share with the esteemed audience this morning. The first is in terms of adoption of technology. The question is, even today, I come from the state of Odisha, and even today, if you were to look at it, about 60% of the state, in terms of the rural areas, especially the tribal-dominated areas, do not have network facilities. So when we talk about technology per se, and especially in the tribal-dominated areas, you find that because of A, the hilly terrain, B is the scarce density of population, you find technology reach in terms of connectivity itself is very poor. When connectivity is very poor, data or technology adoption per se will be very poor. Second is in terms of the users itself, the people itself, in terms of policy. We had a data protection bill that was supposed to be tabled and passed in the parliament. It went to a joint select committee. And the data protection bill thereafter has been withdrawn because there were more than 100 amendments that were promoted by the joint committee. So today we are looking in a technology age in our nation where we do not have a data protection bill. We don't have a data protection law. What is personal data and non-personal data is not defined. What does a large corporation sitting in the room do with that data? No one knows. Is it being monetized or not? I'm not going into the elements of Cambridge Analytica, but I'm talking about the people itself, the data principles. So when you have such challenges that still exist in the country, we should not look at technology per se only from the purpose of users of technology, adoption of technology, or implementation of that technology, or extension of that technology into areas, but also safeguards on the technology per se. And that, I think, is also a key area where the data principle, or here in this case, the user or the citizen, doesn't become the product itself of technology. I think those are key areas that we also need to focus on and look at as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you for opening with that, Dr. Patra. Dr. Khan, I want you to take a gendered perspective. There's certainly the fact that people are becoming products and that there's an increased expectation for companies to do more. When it comes to women, do you think that there should be a set of policies or laws that policymakers need to be more mindful of when it comes to women and how women are using technology and what they might fall victim to and also what they might benefit from in the process?
Well, when we talk about technology, I think we are living in a world today which is totally technology driven. It's not just web-based solutions or internet that we talk of. In fact, around us, all intelligence, artificial intelligence-based gadgets or data or whatever knowledge or tracking, whatever we are doing today, it's technology driven. Now, in such a world where the virtual and the physical world seem to be physically, seamlessly integrated today, we have a lot of challenges, not only for women, but in general, because today we have a boundaryless world. We cannot think about national boundaries. If some woman somewhere is abused from outside the national boundary, what do we do? What firewalls do we have? Can the government think about some security where a woman is protected if she's abused from another country? We have no solution for that today. At the same time, as Dr. Sasmit Patra spoke here, we have a slowly developing social divide because there are haves and have-nots which have been there in this world. Again, we have a digital have and have-not world coming up. For all this, whatever judicial system we have today caters to the physical world, not to the virtual world. So we need to think about a judicial system which goes beyond boundaries and where we can, like currency, for example, you have currency, gold, where nothing physical is needed. At the same time, with the drone technology coming up, with whatever is of benefit to us, it is simultaneously also a threat that can be developed. For instance, we have a bill we just passed last time on nuclear weapons. Now, nuclear weapon, at least we can see physically, but supposing we just transfer a formula from one country to the other, it just needs a transfer digitally. So it's nothing physical. How do you control that? Or chemical warfare. Chemical warfare, you need not carry something big which comes across boundaries. It may just be a simple formula. So gender-based approach has to be there everywhere in every aspect of life, but I feel this is much beyond that. If we come down to companies, I can only say that it can benefit women and there can be laws where the second shift or third shift for a woman may be from her home, from the comfort of her home, so she need not come down to her office during the second shift or third shift. Or these call centers that we have. So in the call centers, we have more women virtual agents who are more sensitive to the needs of women. And if a caller calls up, she is more comfortable talking to a woman. So such things can come up with technology, but I feel that we need to think much beyond boundaries. In fact, we need an international court of justice also. That also should be conceptualized today, because very soon artificial intelligence is going to overcome us, and it's also going to prove to be a threat to nations, and the very concept of nations will have to be redefined, I feel.
Thank you for that. That was very insightful, and in fact, I'll circle back to the kind of creating international courts concept. Dr. Maji, you bring a very interesting background. You come from a state that is largely tribal. When it comes to both sides of the coin, आपके टेक्नोलॉजी के बेनिफिट्स भी हैं जहाँ पे आप देख सकते हैं कि लोगों को फ़ायदा हो रहा है इकोनॉमिकली, लेकिन उसके काफ़ी खामियां भी हैं. सो इफ़ यू वर टू आइडेंटिफाई कि ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज़ के लिए हैज़ टेक्नोलॉजी बिन अ बून, उनको क्या उससे फ़ायदा हुआ है कि आपको लगता है उससे दुविधा है ज़्यादा बढ़ गई है?
नमस्कार. मैं झारखंड से बिलोंग करती हूँ और झारखंड, उड़ीसा, छत्तीसगढ़, बिहार, इसके जो ट्राइबल बेल्ट हैं वहाँ पे बहुत बड़ी एक समस्या है ट्रैफिकिंग की। और ट्रैफिकिंग की मूल वजह ये है कि उन इलाकों में या दुर्गम इलाकों में रोज़गार का अभाव है, जिसके कारण उन्हें दूसरे स्टेट्स में नौकरी के नाम पर ले जाया जाता है और वहाँ जाकर उनका हर तरह से शोषण होता है। मुझे लगता है कि अभी जैसे हमारी सरकार ने, हमारे मुख्यमंत्री माननीय हेमंत सोरेन जी ने पलाश ब्रांड ई पोर्टल में लॉन्च किया है, जिसमें कि उनको मार्केटिंग की सुविधा उपलब्ध कराई गई है ऑनलाइन। टेक्नोलॉजी से जो फ़ायदा हमें हुआ है, क्योंकि पहले रोज़गार के लिए उन्हें दूसरे राज्यों में, दूसरे स्टेट्स में जाना पड़ता था, लेकिन अब वो अपने घर में बैठकर जो बहुत सारी चीज़ों का उत्पादन कर रही है और उसे ऑनलाइन उसको बेचने की व्यवस्था सरकार कर रही है, जिससे रोज़गार उन्हें मिल रहा है। और जितनी तरह की चीज़ें, उनकी बहुत ज़्यादा डिमांड भी है नेशनल और इंटरनेशनल मार्केट में, जो वो घर बैठे कर पा रही हैं। फ़ायदा तो ये है, बट ये फेक आईडी जो आजकल बना के लोग दूसरों को उसमें गलत इन्फॉर्मेशन दे के उनके साथ जो फ्रॉड हो रहा है, चूँकि वो कम पढ़े लिखे होते हैं तो उनके साथ ठगी बहुत ज़्यादा होती है। तो फेक आईडी ना बनाया जाए और इस पर इसकी मॉनिटरिंग बहुत ज़रूरी है, क्योंकि इससे मैं विमेन कमीशन में चेयरपर्सन रहने के दौरान भी देखा है कि दोस्ती के नाम पे बहुत सारी लड़कियों का लाइफ स्पॉइल होता है और वो नहीं समझ पाती हैं कि उनको ब्लैकमेल करने के लिए या इस तरह से किया जाता है। तो फेक आईडी पर नज़र रखनी चाहिए, क्योंकि पता ही नहीं चल पाता है उसे कि कौन व्यक्ति उसके साथ संपर्क कर रहा है, शादी का झांसा दे रहा है। तो फ़ायदा तो है, उसके साथ नुकसान भी बहुत ज़्यादा है, क्योंकि उसमें यहाँ पे एक जामताड़ा एक जगह है, जैसे वहाँ पे बैंक बैलेंस भी बहुत लोगों का ख़त्म हो जाता है अचानक से। तो इसकी मॉनिटरिंग ज़रूरी है कि किस आईडी से लोग आपसे बात कर रहे हैं। जैसे और जगहों पे आजकल बैंक वगैरह में आधार कार्ड से जोड़ दिया गया है ताकि कोई उसमें फ्रॉड ना कर सके। उसी तरह से मुझे लगता है फेसबुक, ट्विटर और इन सब सारी चीज़ों की मॉनिटरिंग प्रॉपर वे में होनी चाहिए, ताकि महिलाएं भी इससे ठगने से बच जाएं।
Thank you for that, Dr. Maji. I'll just briefly translate the last few points so that our international audience can have a better understanding, which is, she spoke briefly about essentially, again, what we talked about before is that there are two sides of the coin, and especially when it comes to tribal communities or when it comes to more marginalized communities generally, there are issues about having online protection and not falling victim to some of the scams and issues that come up. I am very briefly summarizing this. I will do a better job in the future, I promise. With that being said, I'll turn to Mr. Reddy. Mr. Reddy, you spoke very briefly before about Andhra and how Andhra, especially when it comes to women farmers, are doing some really phenomenal things. What are some of the things, if we were to take a more positive note on the implication of technology on rural and agricultural belt that you see happening?
Thank you, Rwitwika. So, before I go into talking about the farmers, for all the people who come from abroad, I just want to give a perspective of my constituency, like a typical parliament constituency. The number of voters is almost 1.5 million. It's like a small nation, the population of a small nation. So the technology plays a very important role in effective administration, or making things more practically feasible for the people. But if we're talking about farmers, so keeping this in mind to make the administration more effective, our state, we have a very young chief minister, who's very proactive, Mr. Jagannath Reddy. So we did something called a Grama Sachivalaya, or a village secretariat, where for a population of 2,000 or 2,500 people, we have a small government office where there's an agriculture officer, there's a medical officer, and you get all the services there. They don't need to go to everything is the doorstep of their villages. And so basically, we have a Raitu Bharosa Kendra, which means a farmer's center where there's a kiosk where they can the farmers can go speak to the agriculture officer where the soil is tested and where they get an insight of the market rates, and even the government procures the whatever the seeds that quality seeds, quality farm equipment, everything is there on the doorstep of the village. So basically, agriculture, almost 65% of the people in our state are dependent on agriculture, but it's been a male-dominated field because earlier they need to go sell their product, they had to go, everything was done, more than what they were doing in the actual farming, they had to go and basically do the other things like procuring material and selling their crop. But all these things is now been, the government is facilitating this at the doorstep. So more women, actually we see a lot of women working in the field. So all these women who own the land, now they have come forward, it's made all the systems very simple, and they're able to sell the product. There's security for that. There's a proper insurance from the government. So everything is actually it's well organized for the women folk. And now, there are a lot of people. Of late there have been a substantial increase in the number of women who are actually leading as farmers in the villages. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Ms. Reddy. Dr. Patra, I'll circle back to one of the points that you raised. With whether it's the women farmers, whether it's the communities, the tribal communities in Jharkhand, you talked about how it's essentially the data which is coming out from these folks has become a product. And the people ourselves, we've become products, right? And the Supreme Court has stepped in there's been a court judgment, not the Supreme Court, there's been a court judgment on this in terms of what privacy looks like. I'm going to ask you a tough question now. While the courts have stepped in, and there's a recognition clearly that people have become products, what do you think lawmakers have done in India which is productive so far? And do you think it is enough, given that we are already seeing some of the perils of this come out, which is perils of the technology use, having people fall victim, losing money, whatever, there's a whole gamut of issues. Do you think lawmakers have done enough in this process so far?
The lawmakers, neither the parliament, has done enough so far as data protection, data privacy, or safeguarding citizens' interests on data per se is concerned. You have hundreds of mobile apps that are easily available on Google Play at the moment, as we speak, where finance apps are there which provides loans up to few lakhs within a matter of few minutes by sharing some data. Madam Dr. Mahua Maji ji talked about the issue relating to how fake calls are made, phishing calls are made, and data is transferred about bank details very easily today. Before going to that, let me talk about something positive and then I'll relate to it. If you look at the state of Odisha, what Midhun ji was talking about Andhra, I'll give you two specific examples how the adoption of technology has really helped. We are a state of about 43 million people, and about 80% have been provided with a health card, which is a smart card, has a small chip, which is called as a Biju Swasth Kalyan Yojana. What does it do? For a woman up to 10 lakh rupees per annum, and for a male person up to 5 lakh rupees per annum, it's free healthcare. It's not an insurance program like you have the Ayushman. It's an assurance program. You take that smart card, walk into a government hospital, log it in. It has all the data of the concerned person, and the entire treatment up to 5 lakhs for a male person, up to 10 lakhs for a lady is free of cost. They don't have to pay anything. They don't have to fill anything. They don't have to provide any information, because that small chip itself on the card has everything, which earlier used to be the person will bring its Aadhaar card, its voter ID card, its ration bill, etc. All of that has been taken away. So a small chip is enough as a technology gadget that will help improve the lives of the poor and the marginalized in the state. That's one. Second, in terms of women's self-help groups, there are about 7 million women who are there right now in Odisha, who are working as women self-help groups, and what is their job? They do village-based industries. From making small pickles to creating agarbattis, which are incense sticks, to doing things. Today, the government, when it goes for a buyback guarantee with them, uses the same level of technology. They've got specific cards that have been given to them where they can actually purchase and sell their products and raw materials based on that with a buyback guarantee. That is technology for you. How technology can be used to make life simpler, easier, more effective, and more productive. Healthcare I talked about, livelihood support I talked about. Coming back to your initial idea about whether we have done enough as lawmakers, no, we have not done enough. Whether India requires more regulations in terms of appreciating individuals who are data principles to be safeguarded, we have not done enough. And I'm not talking about a specific government per se, since the advent of technology, and technology should not be seen from the prism of a Facebook or a Twitter or a Google, or should be seen from a prism of some data transfer. Technology is as simple as using for disaster management. In disaster management, technology is used for mitigation and for taking care of adaptation. There's so much written about in the Paris Agreement. Is technology now today available in India for ensuring that? Have we as a nation and a government been able to create that bridge, that gap? No. So as a lawmaker, I personally feel, it's my conviction, that we need to do a lot more. We do not have a legislation. Can you think a country of 1.3 billion people does not have a law how its data is to be governed? We don't have a law at the very moment. Today, if you're using data and it's under the jurisdiction of the Indian court and the Indian laws, there is no law. Your data can be monetized by anyone in this country without you having an access or a say in this matter. I think those are critical areas of regulation, of legislation that we need to do.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your candid response in terms of the need to do more. Dr. Khan, I really like the point that you raised, and I'll build on Dr. Patra's point, which is that you mentioned drone technology, for example. So you talked not just about what we have in our hands, but also kind of the more visible pieces of technology. Given lawmakers are already not doing enough, what are, some of the problems that you see coming up as we kind of still play catch up to what technology is creating in terms of problems? And then B, if you were to go ahead and focus on one or two areas, that these are the X are the most pressing areas that lawmakers need to focus on, what would those be?
Well, as it is, technology has given us a lot of ease in our life and all. And because of technology, governance today has become more transparent, it has become more human independent. So all these are benefits of technology. But when you talk about safeguards, I would like to talk about one very pressing thing that is related to children. Because today, online education has become part of life. Now, when I give my child the handset, he has access to anything and everything on the mobile, which may not be very good for the child in his formative years. So the responsibility for providing whatever is there accessible to child rests on the service provider. But if the government comes up with some kind of a regulation or some kind of a technology-driven app or something where the user is responsible to give what is needed for the child. Like you have the domain on .edu domain. That way, supposing the child only gets educational related material, and that is the choice of the family, that they decide to take only education related material, it should be the user's choice to select that and to give it to the child. Because children today are at a very, very vulnerable sort of situation in this technology race. Because while the children are learning, many benefits are coming out of it. At the same time, you have mental health problems, you have things which children are watching which they shouldn't be doing at that vulnerable age. So here the government should step in, and the government should ensure that there are ways in which children receive only what they should be looking at. Secondly, I would also like to talk about, when you mentioned pressing issues, the most pressing of issues in a political world today, I feel, is the EVM. Because the EVM machine, we are using this machine for voting, but whether this is foolproof, whether any tampering is possible, when tampering is possible in any other aspect of technology, why not in the EVMs? So shouldn't we be rethinking about this? Shouldn't there be some balanced approach where we at least have elections where some part is taken on ballot paper, some area EVM, and then we match and see whether everything is in place or not? Because here, if you are able to, tamper and modify and according to your wills and fancies, even if there is a doubt in your mind, I think that doubt has to completely go away if you have to have confidence in democracy. So I think these are one or two very pressing issues which I thought I should mention.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Khan. And in fact, I think that goes directly into Dr. Patra's point as well, is if people become products and EVM is at risk, as well as the fact that we can be manipulated by data is at risk. We're seeing that play out in the US right now and what the implications of that is. Dr. Maji, Dr. Khan raised the point about children's protection, and you had talked before about trafficking and the fact that we need to have components of technology to build to better manage trafficking issues that are coming up. आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगी trafficking के बारे में जो आपको technology related लगे?
एक्चुअली ट्रैफिकर्स जब लड़कियों को ले जाते हैं, अगर उसके लिए ऑनलाइन मॉनिटरिंग की कोई व्यवस्था हो तो निश्चित रूप से वो उनका मिसयूज़ नहीं कर पाएंगे। जैसे उनके साथ उनका शारीरिक, मानसिक, आर्थिक हर तरह का शोषण होता है। कई बार उनको प्रोस्टिट्यूट भी बना दिया जाता है। अगर वो घर से जाते समय वहाँ गांव में जो मुखिया हैं और इस तरह के लोग हैं, उनके पास अगर इस तरह का कोई ऑनलाइन सुविधा हो कि वहाँ रजिस्ट्रेशन हो जाए कि वो किन के साथ जा रहे हैं, कहाँ जा रहे हैं, और टाइम टू टाइम उसकी मॉनिटरिंग की जाए, तो निश्चित रूप से ट्रैफिकिंग की समस्या का काफ़ी हद तक समाधान हो सकता है। क्योंकि माइग्रेशन को आप रोक नहीं सकते। कोई भी अगर 18 इयर्स की है तो वो अपनी मर्ज़ी से कहीं भी जाके रोज़गार के लिए या एजुकेशन के लिए जा सकती है। ये तो हम उसके मौलिक अधिकार है, उसे हम रोक नहीं सकते, लेकिन हम उनकी मॉनिटरिंग करके उसको हम लोग बचा सकते हैं। क्योंकि इसके लिए एंटी ह्यूमन ट्रैफिकिंग यूनिट्स बहुत सारे पुलिस डिपार्टमेंट्स में भी हैं, उनको रेस्क्यू करके लाया भी जाता है, लेकिन कई बार फिर वापस भी वो चले जाते हैं। और बार बार उनको लाने के बावजूद ये प्रॉब्लम बिहार, झारखंड, उड़ीसा, छत्तीसगढ़ के गवर्नमेंट के सामने आते हैं। ये एक प्रॉब्लम है। और मैं एक और इशू को अगर आप कहेंगे तो टच करती हूँ, विच हंटिंग जो है वो मेजर प्रॉब्लम है ट्राइबल एरियाज़ का। उसमें मैंने विमेन कमीशन में देखा है कि चूँकि वहाँ पर हॉस्पिटल्स की सुविधा दुर्गम इलाकों में नहीं रहती है कई बार, तो ये लोग वहाँ जो ब्लैक मैजिक करते हैं, जो लोग ओझा गुनी, उनके पास ग्रामीण जाते हैं ट्रीटमेंट के लिए कोई बीमारी होने से। तो मुझे लगता है कि वहाँ पे चूँकि सरकार की तरफ से हर रूरल एरिया में, पहाड़ों में, जंगल में, हर जगह प्राइमरी हेल्थ सेंटर्स होते हैं, और अगर उनकी प्रॉपर मॉनिटरिंग की जाए ऑनलाइन, तो इससे मुझे लगता है डॉक्टर्स, नर्स, कंपाउंडर, ये लोग वहाँ ड्यूटी पे आएंगे सही टाइम से। और जब उनको हेल्थ फैसिलिटी मिल जाएगी तो ये ब्लैक मैजिक करने वाले लोगों से बचाव उनका होगा। क्योंकि जब मैंने देखा है कि गाँव में जब कोई ओझा देखता है कि किसी बीमारी को ठीक नहीं कर पा रहा है जादू टोना से या झाड़ फूँक से, तो गांव की किसी ऐसी महिला को ये लोग चुनते हैं जो कि बहुत कमज़ोर है और कुपोषण की शिकार है, और उनको डायन करार दिया जाता है, और पूरे गांव में जितनी भी मृत्यु होती है उनके दोषी उन्हीं को बनाया जाता है। तो कहीं ना कहीं आप इसको हेल्थ इश्यूज से जोड़ के देख सकते हैं कि विच हंटिंग को रोकने के लिए कारगर कदम ये होगा कि जो भी हेल्थ सेंटर है गाँव में, उसकी मॉनिटरिंग ऑनलाइन की जाए। जैसे कि हमारे यहाँ पे आंगनबाड़ी केंद्र और जो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स होते हैं वहाँ पर जीपीएस सिस्टम है, चूँकि एक सुपरवाइज़र होती हैं जिनको एक टैब दिया जाता है जिसमें जीपीएस लगा रहता है, वो लोग हर आंगनबाड़ी केंद्र में जाती हैं और स्कूल्स में भी जाती हैं और देखती हैं कि मिड डे मील में क्या क्या सर्व किया गया है, एग्स वगैरह दिए गए हैं कि नहीं जो सरकार दे रही है, उसकी फ़ोटोग्राफी होती है और एवरीडे वो जाके डिस्ट्रिक्ट ऑफिस में वो चला जाता है, उनके कंप्यूटर में वो रहता है, दर्ज रहता है। तो इसी के कारण उसमें थोड़ा कम भ्रष्टाचार हो पाता है। तो मुझे लगता है कि हेल्थ सेंटर्स के साथ भी अगर टेक्नोलॉजी की मदद से हम लोग ट्रैफिकिंग और विच हंटिंग के प्रॉब्लम्स को हम लोग दूर कर सकते हैं।
Thank you for that, Dr. Maji. I'll just briefly translate the 2 points that she raised. The first was about trafficking and the fact that, if there are online registration tools where women can be tracked or women can register voluntarily and essentially go ahead and have a database which essentially says which communities they're in, especially vulnerable and at-risk women, then there is a technology component when it comes to being able to monitor, especially given that anti-human trafficking units which are present often rescue women, but then they become victims to trafficking again. And if you're able to essentially have tools which can track them, then that is a tangible way in which technology can manage and address issues rooting in human trafficking. And then the second point that she raised about was witch hunting, which is a major problem in Jharkhand, is if there are tools which can be basically put in public health centers where you can monitor the availability of local doctors and of health practitioners, then you have better access to healthcare, which ensures that people who are kind of practicing witch hunting, women don't end up going to them and actually have access to better healthcare programs. So those are kind of two examples that Dr. Maji gave of how technology can enable a better quality of life within Jharkhand. Dr. Maji raised an interesting perspective, and Mr. Reddy, I'd love to get your views on that, which is increased responsibility of tech companies. Tech companies have become ginormous. There is no doubt about that. They compete with the size of governments, if not larger, in terms of influence, which means we should expect more out of companies who are working in this space. When it comes from a lawmaker's perspective, what do you expect should be the responsibilities of large companies like the Metas and the Amazons of the world, from your perspective?
I mean, as a lawmaker, basically, I think policy and technology are interlinked and intertwined. So there should be a very fine balance or equilibrium between the technology and regulation, because as technology is advancing, we just have very basic regulations in our country. And what I feel is that we need an independent apex agency or organization which can take decisions on a daily basis. Because we are seeing every day there's a new scam or a new thing where people are, we just can't blame the big corporates. There are even small companies like loan apps, recently I've seen a few things where they lure people with easy money, no security, they just lend money online. But we need to download their app. I'm just citing an example. And that app actually gets all the information, all the personal data, all the pictures, all the contacts. And once they're not able to pay, and generally people who get lured to such things are people in distress. And obviously there are going to be people who are not able to pay that. And we've seen cases where they call up all the contacts and harass these people who have borrowed the money and share their personal information, share their pictures. So we've seen people, a couple of people even committed suicide recently. And all these things are very serious. Each month, I mean, not even a year, each month there are new types of scamsters coming in trying to exploit the system. But just because such people are coming, we cannot brand the digital platforms are being bad or anything, because there are positive aspects as well. For example, all the rural folk, I can cite an example, how about a tribal girl from my constituency cracked the Indian Administrative Service exams. So, I mean, I personally met her and I asked her like how she could do, because all the students who crack that exam, who get selected, most of them are from they are from the big institutions where they are tutored, where they are trained. But she simply said that she could practice and she could learn online through videos, and she took online classes. So the various things like that. I mean, it's not just that. We have technology like for the safety of women. There's an app now for the women in our state, like it's called the Disha app. So where it's like almost when in emergency you just need to just check your mobile 3 times or just press the SOS button. Like the police immediately track you when there's help offered. Like almost like 5 million people have downloaded that app, and it's like they are positive and there is negative things. But what I feel is that we need a strong regulator, independent apex regulator body, which can take decisions on a daily basis. So we can't wait for things to happen. We need proper regulation on a daily basis, and not just branding the big corporates saying that all the ill effects are because of them. I mean, they are doing a good job. If you see Amazon, there are like almost 9 million self-help groups in my state. And Amazon is playing a very important role in marketing their products, which is very good, because people from deep villages in my constituency, they are able to sell their products online to somewhere, say in Delhi or in other states. It's a positive thing, and it's changing their lives. But the ill effects, I think we need to address them with priority, and it should be given. I mean, as a lawmaker, I think on my list, regulating such ill effects is a priority on my list. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad you were able to weigh out both the good and the not so good, let's call it. We have about 10 minutes on the clock. I'll ask one round of general questions, and then I'd love to open it up for the audience to ask any questions that might be there. So I'll just come to you in a minute. 2024 is coming up. And this 2024 is going to be unlike a lot of other ones, because the role of technology has only grown over time. If you take a couple of minutes, and now as in terms of lawmakers, some elected, some selected, well, not selected, nominated, what is the right word for that? Some in Rajya Sabha. What do you think are some of the risks? What do you think are some of the things that we need to curb with 2024 coming up? Ms. Reddy, I'll start with you, because I know that's close to your heart. From a technology perspective, what do we need to regulate? What do we need to keep in mind to make sure our elections are fair and protected in light of 2024?
In terms of the election, like as my colleagues here spoke, I think it's a protection of the data. I mean, what's there available on the public domain. So I think it is mandatory that we make proper legislations to protect personal data, personal information from any sort of misuse or any other sale of this data or whatever, because I think that's a priority right now, because data in the wrong hands can have major ill effects. That's what I feel. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Dr. Maji, इलेक्शन 2024 के माध्यम से आपको क्या लगता है, कैसे क्या किया जा सकता है प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए?
हमारे देश में इलेक्शन कराना बहुत ज़्यादा खर्चीला होता है, बहुत ज़्यादा मैन पावर की ज़रूरत होती है। ड्यूटी में जिनको रूरल एरिया में भेजे जाते हैं, जो गवर्नमेंट स्टाफ्स को, उनकी हालत भी बहुत ख़राब होती है, क्योंकि वहाँ ना ठीक से कोई व्यवस्था होती है, नक्सली एरियाज़ हैं। तो मुझे लगता है अगर इसको ऑनलाइन कुछ व्यवस्था की जाए तो निश्चित रूप से हमारी सरकार के बहुत सारे पैसे भी बचेंगे और बहुत लोगों को भी राहत मिलेगी। इसको फेयर करने के लिए कुछ ऐसे रूल्स बनाने होंगे, उनकी प्रॉपर मॉनिटरिंग होगी कि फेक वोटिंग ना हो। अदरवाइज़ ये बहुत आसान तरीका होगा रूरल एरिया में कराने का। बट उसके लिए एक प्रॉब्लम है, जहाँ सब जगह टावर वगैरह की दिक्कतें आती हैं कई जगह। जो टेलीफोन टावर्स होते हैं मोबाइल के, वो हर जगह नहीं है, इसके लिए नेटवर्क की प्रॉब्लम है। तो सबसे पहले नेटवर्क को दुरुस्त करना होगा, एश्योर करना होगा कि हर इलाके में जहाँ पर भी लोग हैं वहाँ मोबाइल सेवा पहुँचे, क्योंकि सब कुछ डिजिटल हो गया है, आधार कार्ड वगैरह। और आजकल हमारे यहाँ पेमेंट्स भी जो होते हैं, मनरेगा के पेमेंट्स और वृद्धा पेंशन और तमाम चीज़ें वो ऑनलाइन की जाती हैं, ताकि मिडिल मैन जो जिस तरह से उनको फ्रॉड करते हैं वो ना हो। ये बहुत अच्छी व्यवस्था है, लेकिन जहाँ पर नेटवर्क नहीं है मोबाइल का, वहाँ क्या हो, इसके लिए सरकार को सोचना ज़रूरी है, अंतिम व्यक्ति तक सुविधा पहुँचे। थैंक यू।
Thank you, Dr. Maji. Dr. Khan, do you want to go ahead? Oh, sorry, I forgot to translate. Knew I was going to mess up. But Dr. Maji just briefly actually came up with a brilliant idea. She talked about how in rural areas or in remote areas where actually getting voters out is relatively harder. Also, she talked about how elections are expensive. Using technology as a tool to make sure that those kind of remote areas, those people have a capacity to vote. She said this with the caveat that getting them to vote with this technology tool is going to be, one would have to be mindful in designing it to make sure that there are no fake votes which are going in and that the sanctity of the election process is maintained. But it was a brilliant idea in terms of making sure that the farthest corners can be reached in terms of voting through technology tools.
Well, I feel that it's too early and too idealistic to think about online elections, because there are so many things to safeguard against. It shouldn't be that we are landing ourselves into something more dangerous. So even though the process is tedious, even though people have to be brought and all that, I feel at this point of time, we must not think about that, but maybe with proper safeguards at a later stage of life. When we talk about elections, I would like to also speak about propaganda, because today social media is used in a very, very easy way to sensitize minds. There are things where hatred is spread. There are false things which are sent about. So people really don't know what is reality, what is not the truth. So in order to fact check, there are certain private players who have some sites which are fact-checking sites. But I feel here the government needs to step in, and there has to be some site by the government where people can go and check whether whatever is being spread is really a fact or not. Because unless this fact check is really there from an agency which is very, very authentic itself, this kind of propaganda will keep spreading, and which is not healthy for democracy.
There's first the issue, as Dr. Khan has already raised, about propaganda. 2024 general elections will be more competitive, more aggressive, and will have more, I should say, more provoking statements and more provoking fake news. So one is, in a country like India, where a post in a social media can lead to a communal violence and riots, which has been the case, it is very important to understand that can there be safeguards to ensure, whether deliberately or as an innocent mistake, such statements, not only with a malice and intention, but even otherwise, when put up on social media, can be brought down without having to spend 72 hours through a certain longitudinal process in order to do that. Because those hours spent in that social media post being up really leads to more and more tensions creating in a specific area. Second, in terms of data, I don't want to stretch the argument with Cambridge Analytica, but the fact is that many countries and even platforms have admitted that data is freely available across various verticals, under the guise of third-party usage. The question is, when you have such data and then directed impact on voters as beneficiaries, is it fair? Does that result in electoral malpractice one way or the other? If, let's say, a certain political party buys certain amount of ads online, on online platforms, and thereby gains some level of leverage on the platform to nudge it, to poke it, to look into a certain way of helping it, should that be allowed? And if it is allowed, is that electoral malpractice? The quid pro quo that exists between I'm not looking only at Facebook or Twitter, etc. I'm not looking at that only. I'm looking at the troll armies. I'm looking at the troll armies of various IT wings across political parties that use this as a battlefield to influence voters, create narratives, look at hitting out at opposition in a way which is demeaning. And we allow it to happen with impunity without taking measures of it. Why? Because they are unverified accounts. With SIM cards that can be bought for 60 rupees today in this country, you can create N number of proxy Twitter handles and Facebook handles and use them to create an influence which far goes beyond the normal fair practices of politics and elections. So in a country of 1.3 billion people, where even today, about 20% are still having data adoption, if you look at the real numbers only, there is a necessity for a country which is so diverse with caste, creed, religion, gender, to be able to safeguard those. Otherwise, anyone who has deep pockets today can probably drive the narrative of 2024, one way or the other, especially for the urban areas where roughly about 30% of the seats are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patra. On that note, for 2024, I would like to thank our panelists today. This was a wonderful panel. I apologize we couldn't get to the questions, but I will request our panelists to hold back a little bit so that in case someone wants to reach out to them, they can do so. Thank you so much for your time. This truly was riveting. Thank you. I really appreciate it.